They thought silence meant weakness. That was their first mistake. Jordan Parker, a calm black teacher in a prestigious Chicago school, became the perfect target overnight. A serious accusation appeared with no evidence, but everyone believed it. No questions, no defense. Just one quiet decision. He had to go. But Jordan didn't argue. He didn't fight back. He just asked one question. "Where is the evidence?" And in that moment, everything started to break, because his silence wasn't surrender. It was a trap. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent. This story is for you. The Silent Divide. Chicago, a cold morning. Chicago woke beneath a flat gray sky, the kind that pressed low over the city and turned every breath into mist. A sharp wind cut through the streets, slipping between buildings and rattling loose signs. For a few seconds, the city felt like it was holding something back, something not yet spoken. Inside Lincoln Heights High School, the warmth of fluorescent lights replaced the cold, but not the tension. Hallways filled with movement. Lockers slammed. Shoes echoed across polished floors. Everything looked normal. But not everything felt that way. Jordan Parker walked through the front doors at exactly 7:42 a.m., the same time he arrived every day. Jordan Parker was a 34-year-old African-American male English teacher, calm and composed in appearance. He stood tall with a lean, balanced build that carried quiet strength rather than intimidation. His deep brown skin contrasted with the crisp white shirt beneath his navy blazer. His face was defined but gentle, an oval shape with a firm jawline, full lips, and steady, thoughtful dark eyes that seemed to observe more than they revealed. His hair was short, neatly trimmed, never out of place. There was nothing loud about him. And yet, people noticed when he entered. Not because he demanded attention, but because attention shifted. Conversations softened. A group of teachers near the faculty lounge paused mid-sentence as he passed. One of them, Mrs. Keller, a middle-aged white woman with short, curled hair and a habit of forced smiles, gave him a quick nod without meeting his eyes. Her posture was always slightly stiff around him, as if unsure how long politeness should last. Jordan nodded back, as he always did. He never stopped walking. Jordan didn't come to Lincoln Heights just to teach literature. He came because he believed something simple, that people could change, if someone gave them space to think. It wasn't a belief he formed overnight. Years ago, during his first teaching assignment in a struggling district on the south side of Chicago, he had worked with students who had already been labeled difficult, unreachable, lost causes. One student in particular, Marcus Hill, had once told him, "No one expects anything from me anyway." Jordan had stayed after school every day for 3 weeks, not forcing Marcus to study, just sitting there, asking questions, listening. By the end of that semester, Marcus didn't become perfect, but he stayed. And that, to Jordan, mattered more. That experience shaped him. It defined how he taught. Patience over pressure, questions over control. But not everyone saw that as strength. As Jordan turned down the main hallway, the subtle shift happened again. A group of students standing by the lockers grew quieter as he approached. One of them, a tall blond boy with a varsity jacket, leaned slightly closer to his friend, whispering something just low enough to avoid being heard directly. A short laugh followed. Not loud, not obvious, but intentional. Jordan didn't react. He had learned early on that some reactions gave people exactly what they wanted. Still, he noticed. He always noticed because patterns mattered. Inside classroom 214, Jordan placed his worn leather bag gently on the desk. The room was simple but organized. Rows of desks, a whiteboard covered with yesterday's notes, and a small bookshelf filled with novels that students rarely chose on their own. He moved with quiet efficiency, straightening a stack of papers, adjusting a chair slightly out of place. Then he paused. There, it was again. That feeling. Not danger, not fear, just distance. Across the hallway, Olivia Grant stood near her office door, holding a tablet she hadn't looked at in the last 30 seconds. Olivia Grant was a 41-year-old white American female guidance counselor, composed and observant in appearance. Medium height, slim build, fair skin with faint lines near her eyes that suggested years of careful thinking rather than age alone. Her light brown hair was tied into a neat bun, and she wore a soft gray cardigan over professional attire. Her green eyes were sharp, attentive, but often hesitant. Olivia noticed things, patterns in student behavior, shifts in tone, small inconsistencies others ignored, but noticing wasn't the same as acting. Years earlier, during her first year at Lincoln Heights, she had spoken up about a disciplinary decision she believed was unfair. The response had been polite, but firm. "We appreciate your concern, Olivia, but trust the system." Since then, she had learned something else. The system didn't like to be questioned. Now she stood there, watching Jordan through the open classroom door. She saw the way conversations faded around him. She saw the space people left. And she said nothing. Not yet. Down the corridor, a slow, steady sound echoed, the squeak of a mop against tile. Derek Collins moved methodically across the floor, pushing the mop with practiced rhythm. Derek Collins was a 58-year-old African-American male janitor, quiet and grounded in appearance. Medium height with a slightly stocky build, his posture carried the weight of years, but not weakness. His skin was deep brown, his face lined with experience, and his eyes, dark, calm, and observant, missed very little. His hair had turned mostly gray, cut short and practical. He wore a simple work uniform, sleeves rolled up, movements efficient. Derek had worked at Lincoln Heights for over 20 years. Long enough to see patterns repeat. Long enough to recognize silence when it wasn't harmless. He glanced up briefly as Jordan stepped out of his classroom. Their eyes met for just a moment. Derek gave a small nod. Not formal, not forced, real. Jordan returned it, and in that brief exchange, there was something different. Acknowledgement. The first bell rang. Students began filing into classroom 214, filling seats with the usual mix of energy and reluctance. Jordan stood at the front, hands loosely resting on the desk. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand silence. He simply waited. And slowly, the room followed. Not perfectly, but enough. Still, even in that quiet, something lingered. A subtle tension beneath the surface. A hesitation. Like the room itself wasn't fully willing to meet him halfway. As Jordan began the lesson, his voice was steady, clear, measured. He didn't lecture. He asked questions. "What do you think the author meant here?" A few students responded. Others avoided eye contact. And in the back row, a pair of students exchanged a glance. A quiet smirk. A whisper. Again, not loud enough to call out, but enough to be felt. Jordan paused for a fraction of a second, then continued. Because he understood something most people didn't. Moments like this weren't isolated. They were part of something larger, a pattern forming. Outside the classroom, Olivia watched for a few seconds longer before finally stepping back into her office. Her fingers tightened slightly around the tablet. She told herself it wasn't her place, not yet. Further down the hall, Derek rinsed his mop, the water swirling gray in the bucket. He didn't look up this time, but under his breath, almost too quiet to hear, he muttered, "Seen this before?" Back in classroom 214, Jordan finished his first lesson of the day. Students packed up quickly, chairs scraping lightly against the floor. Some left without looking at him. Some gave quick, polite nods. None stayed. The room emptied faster than it should have. Jordan stood there for a moment after the last student left. The silence returned. But this time, it felt heavier. He looked at the empty desks, then at the door, then back at the board. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened. Because now he understood this wasn't random, this wasn't imagination, this was a pattern, and patterns always told a story. The disruption begins. The second morning felt colder, though the temperature had barely changed. The sky outside Lincoln Heights remained dull and heavy, pressing a quiet weight onto the building. Inside, the rhythm of the school continued as if nothing had shifted. But Jordan Parker knew better. Patterns did not announce themselves. They revealed themselves slowly, through repetition. Classroom 214 filled again, but not with the same energy. There was something sharper now, less hidden than before, but still controlled. Jordan stood at the front, posture steady, hands relaxed at his sides. He watched as students entered, not just who they were, but how they moved, who they looked at, and what they avoided. Then they walked in. Ethan Blake entered first, as if the room belonged to him. Ethan was a 17-year-old white American male student, tall and athletic, with a confident posture that bordered on arrogance. His fair skin was unmarked, his jawline sharp, his light blue eyes quick and calculating. His sandy blonde hair was styled with deliberate care, never out of place. He wore a varsity jacket over a fitted shirt, the kind of effortless style that came from privilege rather than effort. Ethan wasn't loud by default, but when he chose to be, people listened. He had grown up in a family that valued influence. His father, a corporate lawyer known for winning cases by controlling narratives rather than arguing facts. Ethan had learned early. Power wasn't about being right. It was about being believed. Behind him followed Kyle Mercer. Kyle was a 16-year-old white American male, medium height with a lean, restless build. His pale skin contrasted with his messy dark brown hair, and his narrow face carried a permanent smirk that rarely reached his eyes. Kyle's humor was sharp, but rarely kind. He didn't lead. He amplified. His role wasn't to create tension, but to make sure it spread. Unlike Ethan, Kyle didn't come from control. He came from chaos, an unstable home where attention was scarce unless it was loud. He had learned that being noticed, even negatively, was better than being invisible. Last came Noah Pierce. Noah was a 17-year-old white American male, slightly shorter than Ethan, with a slim build and a quieter presence. His light brown hair fell loosely over his forehead, often unstyled. His green eyes carried something different, not confidence, not defiance, but hesitation. He wore simple clothes, nothing that drew attention. Noah wasn't comfortable in the spotlight, but he stayed close to it anyway. His mother had worked 2 jobs for most of his life, and he had learned to adapt, to follow stronger personalities rather than challenge them. It was easier, safer. But something in him had not fully agreed with that choice. The 3 of them moved toward the back row, taking their usual seats. Not hidden, just far enough. Jordan noticed the spacing immediately. Not random, intentional. The lesson began. Jordan wrote a line on the board, his handwriting clean and controlled. Context shapes meaning. He turned slightly, scanning the room. What does that suggest about how we interpret actions? A few hands raised. Before Jordan could call on one, a chair scraped loudly from the back. Kyle leaned back in his seat, stretching his legs out just enough to disrupt the line of desks. "Depends who's doing the action," he said, voice casual but loud enough to pull attention. "Some people get the benefit of the doubt. Others don't." A few students glanced back, not openly reacting but aware. Jordan held his gaze on Kyle for a moment, not confrontational, not dismissive, just steady. "That's one interpretation," Jordan replied calmly. "What factors influence that difference?" Kyle smirked slightly, as if expecting resistance, not engagement. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Reputation," Ethan said. His tone was smooth, controlled. "If someone already looks like trouble, people don't question it." The room shifted slightly. Jordan nodded once. "And what defines that reputation?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back again, exchanging a quick glance with Kyle. The conversation moved on, but the tension stayed. It didn't escalate all at once. It never did. Instead, it unfolded in layers. The next interruption came 10 minutes later. A quiet laugh from the back, timed perfectly when Jordan turned toward the board. Then, a whispered comment, just loud enough for nearby students to hear but not enough to be clearly addressed. Jordan paused once, then continued. He didn't call it out, and that was exactly what Ethan wanted. From the hallway, Olivia Grant passed by slowly, her steps quieter than usual. She wasn't looking directly into the classroom, but her attention lingered. She had begun reviewing records the night before, disciplinary reports, complaint logs, performance reviews. At first, nothing had stood out, until she stopped looking at individual cases and started looking at patterns. Teachers of color receiving more complaints. Complaints with vague wording, resolutions that favored speed over clarity. Olivia wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, but she couldn't ignore it anymore either. She slowed near Jordan's classroom just long enough to hear a fragment of laughter. Then, she kept walking. Back inside, the disruptions grew slightly more deliberate. A late arrival. Kyle this time. He pushed the door open without knocking, his expression neutral, as if the interruption didn't matter. "Sorry," he said flatly, not sounding sorry at all. Jordan glanced at the clock, then at Kyle. "You're late," Jordan said. Kyle shrugged lightly. "Won't happen again." Jordan held the silence for a moment, then nodded once. "Take your seat." No lecture, no escalation. Kyle sat down, but his smirk returned. Because again, he got what he wanted. Not reaction, but space. Noah shifted slightly in his seat. His eyes moved between Ethan and Jordan, then back down to his desk. His fingers tapped lightly against the edge, a subtle rhythm of unease. He hadn't expected it to feel like this. It was supposed to be simple. Just small disruptions, just pushing limits. But something about Jordan's calmness made it harder. Not easier. The bell rang, ending the period. Students packed up quickly again, the same pattern as before. Chairs scraped, bags zipped, conversations resumed, but not with Jordan. Ethan stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket. As he passed Jordan's desk, he paused just slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but enough. "Interesting class," Ethan said, tone neutral, almost polite. Jordan met his eyes. "Glad you think so." Ethan's smile was brief, controlled. Then he walked out. Kyle followed, whispering something that drew a quiet laugh from another student. Noah lingered for half a second longer than the others, then left. The room emptied again. Jordan remained where he was, still, observing. Not the students this time, the pattern, because now it was clearer. This wasn't random behavior. It was coordinated, tested, measured. Later that afternoon, near the end of the school day, Jordan stepped into the hallway again. Derek Collins was there, leaning lightly on his mop handle, watching the flow of students. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. Jordan stopped a few feet away. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Derek exhaled slowly. "I've seen this before," Derek said quietly, his voice low but steady. Jordan looked at him. Derek's eyes didn't move. "They don't start loud," Derek continued. "They start small. Push a little. See what you do." Jordan listened. "And when you don't push back," Derek added, "they push further." Jordan's expression remained calm, but this time there was no uncertainty behind it. Only recognition. Derek gave a small nod, then looked away, returning to his work. "Just remember," he said, almost as an afterthought, "silence don't always mean peace." Jordan didn't respond immediately, because he already understood. Silence could also be permission. That evening, as the school emptied and the last light faded from the windows, Jordan sat alone in his classroom. The desks were still, the board unchanged, the air quiet. But his mind wasn't. He replayed the day, not the words, the patterns, timing, behavior, intent. He wasn't reacting. He was observing, because if there was one thing he had learned, it was that patterns never lied. and this one was just beginning. The accusation. The third morning did not feel colder. It felt sharper. The sky over Chicago remained the same dull gray, but something inside Lincoln Heights had shifted overnight. Not visibly, not openly, but in the way people looked at each other. Quick glances, unfinished sentences, conversations cut short when certain footsteps approached. Jordan Parker noticed it the moment he stepped through the main doors. It wasn't just distance anymore, it was anticipation. He reached classroom 214 and paused briefly before entering. His hand rested on the door handle for half a second longer than usual, not out of hesitation, but awareness. Patterns didn't jump, they evolved. Inside, the room looked unchanged. Desks aligned, board clean, the quiet still intact. But on his desk, something was different. A single sheet of paper, folded, centered, waiting. Jordan stepped closer, his movements steady. He unfolded the paper slowly, eyes scanning the text without rushing. The words were structured, formal, carefully chosen. A complaint. Allegations listed in clean bullet points. Unfair grading practices. Inappropriate conduct toward students. Bias and favoritism. No names, no dates, no specific incidents. Just enough detail to sound credible, and just vague enough to avoid immediate dismissal. Jordan finished reading. His expression did not change, but the silence in the room deepened. The bell rang. The students began entering, but something was off. They were quieter. Not the natural quiet of early morning. A deliberate one. Eyes flicked toward the desk, then away. Whispers moved like currents, low and controlled. Ethan Blake walked in as usual, posture relaxed, expression unreadable. He didn't look at the paper directly, but his eyes lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Kyle Mercer followed, his usual smirk slightly restrained, replaced by something closer to curiosity. Noah Pierce came last, slower than usual, his gaze dropping immediately when it passed over the desk. Jordan folded the paper once more and placed it back down. Then he began the lesson. No announcement, no reaction, just consistency. The class moved forward, but not smoothly. Students answered less, looked down more. Even Ethan seemed quieter, though not uncomfortable, more observant. Kyle tapped his pen lightly against the desk, not disruptive, but restless. Noah didn't look up at all. The energy had changed. But Jordan did not. Halfway through the lesson, there was a knock on the door, firm, controlled. Jordan turned. Standing in the doorway was Margaret Ellis, the administrative assistant to the principal. Margaret Ellis was a 52-year-old white American woman, medium height with a slightly rigid posture. Her short auburn hair was styled neatly, and her expression was always composed to the point of detachment. She wore a dark blazer over a conservative blouse, her appearance reflecting precision and routine. Margaret had worked in the front office for over 15 years, long enough to understand how things moved within the school, not officially but practically. She didn't create decisions. She carried them. "Mr. Parker," she said, voice neutral, "the principal would like to see you." The room stilled. Not completely, but enough. Jordan nodded once. "I'll be there shortly." Margaret didn't respond. She simply stepped back and closed the door. Jordan turned back to the class. "Continue reading the passage," he said calmly. "We'll discuss it when I return." No questions, no resistance, only silence. The walk to the principal's office felt longer than usual, though Jordan's pace never changed. Hallways that had once felt merely distant now felt aware. A few teachers glanced up as he passed. Some held his gaze for a moment too long. Others avoided it entirely. Near the corner, Derek Collins stood beside his cart. He didn't speak, but his eyes followed Jordan. And this time, there was no question in them, only recognition. Inside the main office, everything was controlled, ordered. Still, Margaret gestured toward the closed door of the principal's office. Jordan knocked once. "Come in." Robert Whitman sat behind a large desk, hands folded neatly in front of him. Robert Whitman was a 57-year-old white American male, tall with a lean, controlled build. His pale skin and sharp, angular features gave him a naturally severe appearance. His steel blue eyes were precise, calculating, rarely revealing emotion. His silver-gray hair was combed back with exactness, not a strand out of place. He wore a dark, tailored suit, the kind that signaled authority without needing to raise a voice. Whitman believed in structure, in order, in maintaining the image of the institution above all else. Years earlier, a minor scandal involving a staff member had nearly cost the school its reputation. Since then, Whitman had adopted a philosophy. Problems should be contained before they became visible. Jordan stepped inside. The door closed behind him. Whitman gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." Jordan remained standing for a moment, then sat. Whitman picked up a tablet from his desk, glancing at it briefly before speaking. "We've received a complaint," he said, tone measured, controlled. "Several, actually." Jordan said nothing. Whitman continued. "The allegations are serious, concerns about grading fairness, professional boundaries, bias in classroom conduct." The words were clinical, detached. Jordan listened, not interrupting, not reacting. Whitman leaned back slightly, studying him. "Now," he said, "while these claims have not yet been fully verified, they present a potential risk to the school." There it was. Not truth. Risk. "Lincoln Heights has a reputation to uphold," Whitman added, "and situations like this can escalate quickly." Jordan's expression remained calm. "Have the claims been investigated?" he asked. Whitman paused. Only briefly. "We're in the early stages," he replied, "but given the nature of the situation, we believe it would be best to resolve this quietly." Jordan understood, before the next sentence came. "We think it may be in everyone's best interest," Whitman said, voice softer now, "if you were to submit your resignation." The room did not change, but the air did. This was not a discussion, it was a decision, presented as a suggestion. Jordan sat still, not shocked, not angry, just certain, because now the pattern was complete. He leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, not defensively, just enough to close the distance between conversation and truth. "Has anyone reviewed evidence?" he asked. The question was simple, direct, unavoidable. Whitman's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the tablet. For a moment, he didn't answer, because there was no answer that didn't expose the reality. The silence stretched, longer than it should have, and in that silence, everything became clear. Jordan leaned back again. No change in expression, no raised voice, but something had shifted, not in the room, in him, because now he understood. This wasn't about facts, it was about removal. "I see," Jordan said quietly. Whitman nodded once, as if the matter was already settled. "We would appreciate your cooperation in this process." Jordan stood, slowly, not abruptly. "Thank you for your time," he said, nothing more. He turned and walked toward the door. Whitman did not stop him. Outside, the hallway felt different again, not quieter, heavier. Jordan walked back toward his classroom, each step steady. Near the corner, Derek looked up again. This time, he spoke. "Started, didn't it?" Jordan met his eyes. "Yes," he said. Derek nodded slowly. Didn't say anything else. Back in the classroom, the students were still seated, but no one was reading. They looked up as Jordan entered. Waiting. Watching. Jordan walked to his desk, picked up the folded paper, held it for a moment, then placed it back down. He looked at the class, not searching for guilt, not assigning blame, just observing. Then he spoke. "Turn to page 142, he said calmly. "We'll continue." A few students hesitated, then followed. No one asked about the paper, no one mentioned the office. But the room knew. In the back row, Noah stared at his desk. His fingers curled slightly, because now it didn't feel like a game anymore. Across the building, Olivia Grant sat in her office staring at a spreadsheet filled with names, dates, and outcomes. The pattern was clearer now. Too clear to ignore. Her hand hovered over her keyboard, then began typing. Quietly. Carefully. Back in classroom 214, Jordan continued the lesson. Same tone, same pace, same control. But now, there was no doubt. The pattern had moved to its next stage. And so had he. The stand. The next morning, Chicago felt different. Not colder, not darker, but heavier. As if the city itself had leaned closer to watch what would happen next. Inside Lincoln Heights High School, that same weight settled into the walls. Conversations didn't stop anymore when Jordan Parker passed. They shifted. Lower. Faster. Controlled. Word had spread. Not officially, but efficiently. Jordan entered classroom 214 at the same time as always, his movements unchanged. His posture was steady, his expression calm, his routine intact. But now, attention followed him openly. Students looked longer. Teachers hesitated more noticeably in the hallway. Even the silence had evolved. It wasn't passive anymore, it was watchful. Jordan placed his bag on the desk and paused briefly, his hand resting against the worn leather surface. The complaint from the previous day was no longer just a document. It was a line, and now he had stepped across it. He didn't wait for the administration to act. He acted first. Late the previous afternoon, after leaving the principal's office, Jordan had drafted a formal request. Precise, direct, without emotion, but impossible to ignore. He requested a full investigation, documented, transparent, and complete. He listed exactly what that meant: classroom camera footage, hallway recordings, student interviews, grading audits. No assumptions, no shortcuts, no quiet resolutions. He had sent it to Principal Whitman and copied the district office. That detail mattered. At 8:15 a.m., Jordan was called back to the main office. This time, Margaret Ellis didn't wait at the door. She stood inside, beside the reception desk, her posture more rigid than usual. "You can go in," she said, her tone unchanged, but her eyes briefly meeting his, longer than before. Jordan nodded and walked toward the office. Inside, Robert Whitman stood instead of sitting. That alone was different. He had a tablet in his hand, but he wasn't reading from it. His posture was tighter, less composed than the day before. Control was still there, but now it required effort. "You've made a formal request," Whitman said. Jordan remained standing. "Yes." Whitman exhaled slowly, placing the tablet on the desk. "You've escalated this situation." "No," Jordan replied calmly, "I've clarified it." The distinction hung in the air. Whitman studied him for a moment, then moved around the desk, resting his hands lightly against its edge. "A full investigation will draw attention," Whitman said, "from staff, from parents, from the district." Jordan didn't respond immediately, because that was the point. Whitman continued, his voice lower now. "Once this begins, we don't control how it ends." Jordan met his gaze. "That depends on what the truth is." Another silence. Shorter this time, but sharper. Whitman looked away first. He reached for the tablet again, tapping the screen once. "We'll proceed," he said, "but understand this process will be thorough." Jordan nodded once. "That's what I asked for." Whitman didn't answer, because again, there was nothing to say. The shift in the building was immediate, not announced, but felt. Teachers gathered in quieter groups, conversations leaning toward speculation. Some avoided Jordan entirely now. Others watched him more closely, as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same person: the calm teacher they knew and the subject of a formal investigation. Students moved differently too. Less laughter, more glances. The back row of classroom 214 remained occupied. But even Ethan Blake had changed. Ethan sat with his usual posture, confident, controlled, but now his attention was sharper, more focused. His eyes tracked Jordan more frequently, not out of curiosity, but calculation. He had expected resistance, not escalation. Kyle Mercer, beside him, seemed less relaxed. His movements were quicker, his smirk less consistent. He still whispered, still made quiet comments, but now there was a subtle edge of uncertainty beneath it. Noah Pierce had changed the most. He no longer joined in. He didn't speak. He didn't laugh. He simply sat, eyes forward or down, his hands still, his posture closed. Because now the situation had weight. Jordan continued teaching, exactly as before. Same tone, same pace, same expectations. He didn't reference the investigation, didn't acknowledge the tension. He simply taught, and that made it harder, because there was no reaction to push against. Midway through the day, in a quieter section of the hallway, Derek Collins stood near his cart, his movements slower than usual. He had spent the morning observing, not just cleaning, watching who walked where, who spoke to whom, who avoided eye contact. Patterns. He always watched patterns. Near the administrative corridor, he noticed something off. A security monitor, mounted high near the ceiling, was dark. Not off entirely, but inactive. Derek stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly. He had cleaned around that monitor hundreds of times. It was never inactive during school hours. He didn't say anything immediately. Instead, he continued his work, pushing the cart slowly down the hallway. But his attention remained fixed on that detail. Later, when the hallway cleared, he stepped into the small maintenance room just around the corner. Inside, the hum of old equipment filled the air. He checked the panel. One feed had been disconnected. Not broken. Disconnected, deliberately. Derek stood still for a moment, then exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he muttered under his breath. "Seen this before." Across the building, Olivia Grant sat in her office, her computer screen filled with rows of data. Names, dates, reports, outcomes. She had worked through most of the night, cross-referencing complaints, timelines, and staff assignments. What she found wasn't random. It was consistent. Too consistent. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she typed another search. This time, she focused on video logs, access records, timestamps. And then, she saw it. A missing segment, a gap in the hallway footage from the previous afternoon. Short, but precise. Her breath caught slightly, because now, it wasn't just a pattern. It was interference. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She wasn't supposed to go further. This wasn't her role. This wasn't safe. But she remembered that moment years ago, when she had spoken up and been told to trust the system. And now she understood something else. The system only worked when people protected it. She stood, not quickly, not dramatically, but with decision. Back in classroom 214, the final bell of the day rang. Students began packing up, movements quieter than usual. Ethan stood adjusting his jacket again, but this time he didn't pause at Jordan's desk. Kyle followed, his eyes flicking briefly toward the front before turning away. Noah hesitated, just for a moment, then left. The room emptied. Jordan remained. As always, but now the silence felt different. Not heavy, not uncertain, focused. He walked to the window, looking out at the gray city beyond. Cars moved. People walked. Life continued. But inside this building, something had shifted, not resolved, not finished, but set in motion. A knock came at the door. Jordan turned. Derek stood there, one hand resting lightly against the frame. He didn't step inside, didn't need to. "They've started moving pieces," Derek said quietly. Jordan watched him. "Yeah," Derek added, nodding slightly toward the hallway. But they didn't think anyone was watching. Jordan's expression remained calm. But this time, There was no doubt behind it. "Good," Jordan said simply. Derek gave a small, knowing nod, then stepped away. Jordan looked back at the empty classroom, at the desks, at the board, at the space where everything had started. And now, everything was moving, exactly where it needed to go. The unexpected voices. The morning of the review arrived without announcement, but everyone felt it before it began. The air inside Lincoln Heights carried a different kind of tension now. Not quiet avoidance, not controlled whispers, but something closer to anticipation. The kind that builds when truth is about to surface, even if no one knows exactly how. Jordan Parker entered the building as he always did, steady and composed, his routine unchanged. But today the attention did not shift away from him. It followed him, not with judgment alone, with expectation. The review was not held in a courtroom, but it might as well have been. The school had chosen the auditorium, a space large enough to feel official but contained enough to control. Rows of seats faced a long table at the front where administrators sat, tablets open, expressions measured. Teachers filled the sides. Students were scattered throughout, some sitting in clusters, others alone. Jordan stood near the front, not behind the table, not elevated above anyone else, just present, still, observing. Among the administrators sat Dr. Helen Strauss, a district oversight officer brought in quietly after Jordan's formal request reached beyond the school. Dr. Strauss was a 49-year-old white American woman, tall, with a lean, upright posture that suggested both discipline and restraint. Her short, silver blonde hair framed a narrow face, and her pale blue eyes carried a level of focus that rarely softened. She wore a charcoal suit, minimal jewelry, and an expression that revealed little. Years earlier, she had built her reputation investigating institutional bias cases, quietly, thoroughly, without favor. She was not easily influenced, and she did not rush conclusions. That alone changed the room. The process began formally. Statements were read, the allegations repeated. Unfair grading, inappropriate conduct, bias. The words sounded the same as they had on paper, but now they had weight, because they had to be defended. "Mr. Parker," Dr. Strauss said, her voice even, controlled. "You've requested a full review of these claims. We will begin by hearing from students." Jordan nodded once. No speech, no defense. Just agreement. There was a pause, a long one, because no one moved at first. Students looked at each other, waiting. For someone else. For something safer. Then a chair shifted. Emily Carter stood. Emily Carter was a 17-year-old white American female student, medium height with a slim build and a quiet presence. Her fair skin and soft oval face gave her an almost delicate appearance, but her posture, though slightly tense, held a quiet determination. Her light brown hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her green eyes, though nervous, remained steady as she stepped forward. Emily was not known for speaking up. In fact, she often avoided attention. 2 years earlier, she had struggled academically after transferring schools, nearly falling behind completely. Most teachers had written her off as disengaged, except one. Emily took a breath, then spoke. "Mr. Parker stayed after school, every day for 3 weeks," she said, her voice soft but clear. "He didn't have to. I wasn't even in his class yet." A murmur moved through the room. Emily continued, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "He helped me understand how to write again. Not just assignments, but how to think. No one else did that." She paused, then added more firmly, "He's the reason I passed that semester." Silence followed. Not disbelief, not dismissal, just recognition. Dr. Strauss made a small note. "Thank you," she said. Emily nodded and stepped back, returning to her seat. Another pause, shorter this time, because something had shifted. The first voice had broken the pattern. A second student stood, then a third, one after another, not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. A tall Hispanic student spoke about college applications Jordan had helped him prepare, staying late to review essays line by line. A quiet Asian student described how Jordan had noticed she was struggling before she even asked for help, offering support without embarrassment. A black student in the second row spoke about being the only one in another class who felt unheard, until Jordan treated his ideas as if they mattered. Each story was different, but the pattern was the same: consistency, fairness, effort. Across the room, Olivia Grant sat near the back, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She had brought her data with her: documents, records, timestamps, but now she watched something unfold that numbers alone could not capture. Human evidence. And it was stronger. Ethan Blake remained seated, his posture unchanged, but his focus sharpened. His jaw tightened slightly as each student spoke. This was not what he expected. The narrative was supposed to hold. But it was slipping. Kyle Mercer shifted beside him, his usual confidence reduced to quiet restlessness. He tapped his foot lightly against the floor, his eyes moving more frequently now, less certain of where to settle, and Noah Pierce didn't look up. His hands were clasped together, fingers pressing tightly as if holding something back. Each voice added weight, pressing against the version of events he had accepted just days before. This wasn't supposed to feel real, but now it did. Dr. Strauss raised her head slightly. "Are there any additional statements?" she asked. Another pause, but this one felt different. Because now, people were deciding. Then, from the back of the auditorium, a voice spoke. "Yeah, there is." Heads turned, because the voice didn't belong to anyone expected. A man stepped forward, not a student, not a teacher. Marcus Hill. Marcus Hill was a 20-year-old African-American male, tall, with a strong, athletic build that had filled out since his high school years. His deep brown skin and defined features carried a confidence that had been earned, not given. His dark eyes were steady, focused, and his short, coiled hair was neatly trimmed. He wore a simple jacket over a college hoodie, nothing flashy, but his presence filled the space. There was a calm strength in the way he stood, but also something deeper. Experience. Marcus had not always been this person. 2 years ago, he had been on the edge of dropping out, his grades failing, his future uncertain. Most people had already decided who he was, except one. "I graduated from here," Marcus said, his voice controlled but firm. 2 years ago." Dr. Strauss nodded slightly. "Go ahead." Marcus looked toward Jordan briefly, then back at the room. "I was failing everything," he said. "Didn't care. Didn't think it mattered." The room stayed still. "Most teachers didn't try," Marcus continued, "not because they were bad, but because they didn't expect anything different." He paused. Then, "Mr. Parker did." No one moved. No one spoke. Because this wasn't just a statement. It was context. "He didn't force me to change," Marcus said. "He just didn't give up. Stayed after school. Talked to me like I wasn't already decided." His voice tightened slightly. Not from weakness, but from memory. "I almost dropped out," he added, "but I didn't." A beat. "I'm in college now." Another silence. Then the final line. "Because he didn't treat me like a problem." The room absorbed it, slowly, fully. Olivia lowered her gaze for a moment. Because now the pattern wasn't just visible, it was undeniable. At the front, Dr. Strauss made another note. Longer this time. Jordan stood exactly where he had been from the beginning. Unmoved. Unchanged. He didn't react to the statements, didn't acknowledge them outwardly, but something had shifted. Not in him, around him. Because now, the story was no longer controlled by accusation. It was being rewritten. In the back row, Noah finally looked up. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because now, he couldn't unhear any of it. The truth revealed. The auditorium did not empty after Marcus Hill's words. It held, suspended, as if the entire room understood that something unfinished still remained beneath the surface. Testimonies had shifted the narrative, but they had not closed it. Not yet. At the front, Dr. Helen Strauss closed her folder with deliberate calm. then looked toward the technical staff seated along the side wall. "We will now review available video records," she said. Her voice did not rise, but it carried across the room with authority that did not require repetition. A technician stood up from the control table. Alan Reeves, a 38-year-old white American male, medium height with a slightly hunched posture from years spent leaning over screens. His thinning brown hair and tired eyes gave him a permanently worn look, but his hands moved quickly and precisely across the keyboard. Alan had worked in school IT long enough to understand both systems and how they could be bent. He wasn't a man of confrontation, but he respected data more than opinion. The projector flickered to life. At first, nothing seemed unusual. A hallway, students passing, normal movement. Then the timeline shifted. The first clip showed the corridor outside classroom 214 from 2 days earlier. The timestamp matched the period between classes. Students moved in groups, talking, laughing, then slowly patterns began to emerge. Ethan Blake appeared in frame, leaning casually against a locker. Kyle Mercer stood beside him, gesturing animatedly, his body language exaggerated, as if performing for an audience. A smaller group of students gathered loosely around them. The audio was muted, but the intention was not. Kyle leaned closer to Ethan, speaking rapidly, his mouth forming words that could not be heard, but the expression was clear. Mocking. Deliberate. Ethan responded with a short laugh, then reached into his bag. The clip paused. Dr. Strauss leaned forward slightly. "Continue," she said. The footage resumed. Ethan pulled out a sheet of paper and a pen. He didn't rush. He looked around once, quick, practiced, then began writing. Kyle leaned over his shoulder, pointing at the page, adding suggestions. Another student stepped closer, watching. And then Ethan smiled. Not a wide smile, not obvious, but unmistakable. The kind that comes when something is going exactly as planned. The room did not react immediately, because it didn't need to. Understanding moved faster than sound. The clip changed, now inside the classroom. Jordan Parker stood at the front, teaching. Calm, focused. His movements consistent with everything that had already been described. In the back row, Ethan leaned back in his chair, whispering something to Kyle. Kyle suppressed a laugh. Noah sat between them, his posture tense, his gaze downward. Another moment, Kyle deliberately dropped a pen, letting it roll loudly across the floor. A distraction. Ethan watched Jordan, not with boredom, but with attention. Measuring, testing. The footage cut again. A hallway camera. This time, the timestamp skipped. A gap. Alan paused the video. "Missing segment," he said quietly, almost to himself. Dr. Strauss turned slightly. "Explain." Alan hesitated for a fraction of a second, then spoke more clearly. "There's a break in the recording, approximately 11 minutes. The system logs show it was manually disconnected." A murmur moved through the audience. Before anyone else could respond, Olivia Grant stood. Her movement was calm but deliberate. Olivia walked toward the front, holding a tablet in both hands. Her posture was more upright than it had been before. The hesitation that once defined her had been replaced by something steadier. Decision. "I'd like to add context," she said. Dr. Strauss nodded once. Olivia turned the tablet so it connected to the display. A new set of data appeared. Spreadsheets, names, dates, outcomes. "Over the past 3 years," Olivia began, her voice controlled but firm. "Complaints filed against faculty members show a consistent pattern." She tapped the screen. Highlighted rows appeared. Teachers of color receive a disproportionately higher number of anonymous complaints. In over 70% of those cases, no formal evidence was ever submitted. Another tap. A second set of data appeared. Despite that, administrative actions, warnings, reviews, or pressure to resign occurred at a significantly higher rate compared to similar complaints involving other staff. The room grew quieter. Not because people didn't understand, because they did. Olivia lowered the tablet slightly. "This case follows that pattern," she said. "No accusation, no raised voice, just fact." Dr. Strauss made another note. Longer, more deliberate. From the side of the room, a slow step forward broke the stillness. Derek Collins. He didn't move quickly, didn't draw attention with urgency, but when he stopped near the front, people noticed. Because Derek did not step forward unless something mattered. "I saw the monitor go dark," Derek said, his voice low but steady. Dr. Strauss looked at him. "When?" "Yesterday afternoon," Derek replied. "Hallway outside this room. That camera's never off during school hours." Alan nodded slightly from his seat. "He's right. It would require manual override." Derek continued, his gaze steady. "I checked the panel. It wasn't broken. It was disconnected." A pause, then, "On purpose." Silence filled the auditorium. Not empty, heavy, because now the missing piece had shape. Ethan Blake did not move, but his posture changed. Subtly, his shoulders, once relaxed, were now slightly rigid. His eyes remained forward, but no longer calculating. Now they were fixed. Kyle Mercer shifted beside him, his foot tapping faster, his gaze flicking toward the screen, then away. Noah Pierce sat completely still, but his hands tightened. The final clip began. A closer angle, same hallway, moments before the recording gap. Ethan stood again by the locker. Kyle leaned in, speaking quickly. Noah stood slightly behind them, not participating, but not leaving either. Then, Ethan looked directly toward the camera. For a second, a single second, long enough to register. Then he reached up. Out of frame. The feed cut. No one spoke, because nothing needed to be said. Dr. Strauss closed her folder slowly. Her eyes moved across the room, not searching, but confirming. "The evidence is clear," she said. Her voice was calm. Final. "The complaint lacks substantiation. The behavior recorded demonstrates coordinated disruption. Additionally, there is credible indication of intentional interference with recorded evidence." Each word landed precisely, measured, unavoidable. Across the room, Olivia lowered her tablet. Derek stepped back. Alan leaned away from the keyboard. The system had spoken. Jordan Parker stood exactly where he had been since the beginning. Unmoved. Unchanged. He did not look at Ethan. Did not look at the administrators. He simply stood. Because this moment was not about reaction. It was about truth. In the back row, Noah finally closed his eyes for a brief second. Not to escape, but because now there was nothing left to deny. The choice and the change. The auditorium emptied slowly, not with the usual rush of dismissal, but with something closer to reflection. Conversations didn't rise immediately. People moved in quieter clusters, voices low, eyes thoughtful. What had just happened was not loud, but it had weight, and weight changed how people carried themselves. Jordan Parker remained near the front a moment longer before stepping out into the hallway. The air felt different now, not lighter, not yet, but clearer, as if something that had been held back had finally been allowed to surface. He didn't look around for reactions. He didn't need to, because he already knew. The truth had done what it was supposed to do. "Mr. Parker." The voice came from behind him. Jordan turned. Robert Whitman stood a few steps away, his posture still upright, but no longer rigid. His hands were no longer folded in control. They rested at his sides, slightly tense, as if unsure where to go. For the first time since this began. Whitman did not look like he was managing a situation. He looked like he was inside one. "Could you come to my office?" he asked. The tone had changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Jordan nodded once. Inside the office, the same room felt unfamiliar now. The desk was the same, the lighting unchanged. But the distance between them had shifted. Whitman did not sit immediately. Neither did Jordan. For a moment they stood in silence. Then Whitman spoke. "We were wrong." The words were direct, unadorned, no explanation attached, no defense offered. Just truth. Jordan didn't respond right away because apologies, even simple ones, carried more weight when left to stand on their own. Whitman continued, his voice quieter now. "We moved too quickly. We prioritized the wrong things." He paused, then added more carefully, "That will be addressed." Jordan met his gaze. "Will it?" he asked. Not confrontational, but precise. Whitman didn't answer immediately, because this time he couldn't rely on authority, only intention. "It has to be," Whitman said finally, and for the first time it sounded less like control and more like acknowledgement. The conversation didn't last long after that. There were no formalities, no rehearsed statements, just a recognition of what had happened, and what could not be undone. By the afternoon, decisions were already in motion, not public announcements, but actions. Ethan Blake, Kyle Mercer, and several others involved were called in individually. The process was structured, documented, unavoidable. The system that had once moved quickly to remove Jordan now moved just as deliberately to respond. Ethan entered the office with the same posture he always carried, controlled, confident. But something beneath it had shifted. The certainty was gone. In its place, calculation had turned into consequence. Kyle followed later, less composed, his usual smirk absent entirely. Noah Pierce was called last, and he walked in differently. Not resistant, not defensive, but quiet, because he already knew. Across the building, Olivia Grant stood in the staff meeting room, presenting her findings to a smaller group of administrators and faculty members. The data she had uncovered was no longer hidden inside spreadsheets. It was projected, discussed, acknowledged. "Patterns don't correct themselves," Olivia said, her voice steady. "They have to be addressed intentionally." Her posture was different now, more certain, less hesitant, because this time she wasn't alone. Dr. Strauss stood at the side of the room, observing, occasionally adding clarification, but mostly allowing Olivia's work to stand on its own. The system had been seen, and once seen, it could not be unseen. Near the end of the day, Derek Collins stood in the same hallway he had worked in for years. But today, someone approached him. Linda Chavez, the assistant facilities director, stopped beside him. Linda Chavez was a 45-year-old Latina woman, medium height with a solid practical build. Her dark hair was tied back in a tight ponytail, and her expression carried both authority and fairness. She had started her career as custodial staff before moving into management, and she never forgot where she came from. "I heard what you did," she said simply. Derek shrugged slightly. "Just said what I saw." Linda nodded once. "That's more than most." She paused. "Positions opening up next month. Senior supervisor." Derek looked at her. Not surprised, just aware. "I'll think about it," he said. Linda smiled faintly. "You should." Then she walked away. The final bell rang. Students began leaving, but the energy was different now. Less fragmented, less divided, more grounded. Jordan returned to classroom 214 one last time that day. The room was empty. Quiet, but not the same quiet as before. This silence didn't carry tension. It carried possibility. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Jordan requested a meeting, not with the administration, with the students. They gathered in the classroom. Ethan, Kyle, Noah, and others. No desks rearranged. No formal structure. Just the same room. But different people. Jordan stood at the front. Not behind the desk, not elevated, just present. He didn't begin immediately. He looked at them first, each one, not searching for guilt, not assigning blame, just seeing them. "You made a choice," he said finally. His voice was calm, even. "But every choice has consequences." No raised tone, no lecture, just truth. Ethan shifted slightly in his seat. Kyle looked down. Noah remained still. Jordan continued. "You don't have to like me," he said. "That's not the point." A pause. "The point is who you choose to be." The words didn't rush. They didn't push. They settled. "Respect," Jordan said, "isn't about who deserves it." He let the sentence sit for a moment, then finished it. "It's about who you decide to become." The room was silent, but not the same silence as before. No tension, no resistance, just listening. For the first time, no one laughed. Ethan looked up. Not fully, but enough. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter than anyone had heard it before. "I was wrong." The words weren't forced. They weren't perfect, but they were real. Kyle didn't speak, but he didn't smirk either. And sometimes, that was the first step. Noah raised his head completely. "I want to fix it," he said. Jordan nodded once. "That's a start." Days passed. Not everything changed overnight. It never did. But small things shifted. Ethan no longer sat in the back. Kyle spoke less, but listened more. Noah stayed after class. Across the school, Olivia continued her work, now with support. Policy discussions began. Processes were reviewed, not erased, but improved. Derek accepted the new role, not because he wanted recognition, but because he understood responsibility. And Jordan, he remained the same posture, same voice, same presence, because he had never been trying to win. He had only been trying to stand, and in the end, that was what changed everything. This story reminds us of something simple but powerful. The way we treat people every day matters more than we think. Respect should not depend on status, reputation, or the color of someone's skin. It comes from the choices we make in small moments when no one is watching. In real life, there are still many people like Jordan who face quiet judgment, unfair assumptions, and systems that move too fast without asking the right questions. And there are also people like Olivia and Derek who see the truth, but must decide whether to stay silent or stand up. The lesson is clear. Doing the right thing is not always loud, but it is always necessary. Before judging someone, ask yourself if you truly know the full story. Before staying silent, ask yourself what your silence allows, and if you ever find yourself in a moment where you can choose fairness over comfort. Choose fairness. That is how real change begins. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us your thoughts. And if you believe in stories that teach, inspire, and bring truth to light, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next one. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you in every step you take. And if you believe in choosing truth and kindness, even when it is hard, type Amen in the comments and stand with that message today.